morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Today we are in conversation with Mr. Peter Foster. He's the CEO of Air Astana in Kazakhstan. Peter, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. COVID-19 has really hammered global aviation. It's likely going to hang over the industry for the next couple of years. IATA is talking about it's going to be 2024 before traffic levels get back to the pre-COVID levels. How has it affected your business, and how are you and the airline, the two airlines actually, you've got a low-cost carrier as well, how are you guys dealing with it? How has it affected you?
Yeah, well, of course, you're absolutely right. The effect has been dramatic, and it has been very patchy. I mean, there has been no real pattern to it. We're lucky that we have a large domestic operation because Kazakhstan, of course, is a big country. As you mentioned, we have a low-cost airline as well, which is flying domestically. So actually, our domestic business, since we started again in May, after the lockdown in the country, has been very strong. In fact, we're operating that at 20% higher than this time last year, which is very good. However, our international business has been very badly affected. It's down by 80% in terms of passengers and revenue, and of course, obviously, it is the largest single contribution to the airline, and therefore, you know, it effectively the loss of pretty much the entire international network has been very hard.
Well, we talked about that, and I noticed, I think you sent out some releases the other day that you're actually reopening some flights to Germany, some to Uzbekistan, some to Kyrgyzstan. I never can pronounce that right. Any other international connections being restored? And
no, not really, Matt.
You had talked before also about flights to the U.S., but let's talk about the international flights that have been restored and kind of where you're headed in that direction.
Yes, I mean, we are way down, as I was saying. We're approximately 80% down on international capacity. And yeah, we have a few flights here and there. You know, we've got a daily flight. We have a weekly flight to Tashkent in Uzbekistan. We've got a couple of flights to Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. We've got 4 flights a week into Frankfurt. We've got 7 flights into Istanbul. A couple of charters to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. We've got 8 flights a week into Dubai, and we've got 1 flight a week into Seoul. But I mean, these are, you know, massively reduced numbers on all of those routes. And, you know, just to give you an illustration, Russia is by far our biggest route. And normally we'd be operating 54 flights a week, and now we're operating 1. So I think that just sort of puts into perspective, you know, how the international network has been decimated, really. And so whilst, yeah, we've got a few flights, but it's far beneath what we would expect to be operating.
Yeah, I mean, any international carrier. I'm based in Singapore, and I mean, Singapore Airlines is, you know, 98, 99%, 98+% down. Cathay, same figure. Fortunately, you've got domestic market, as you said. Again, and I was reading some more about Air Astana when we were setting up this interview. You've got sort of a home market strategy of flying the Central Asia region, but you have a kind of an interesting Asian traffic pattern in places like Seoul, KL, Bangkok, among others. I think China as well.
China and Hong Kong as well, mate.
China and Hong Kong. Are those not flying at all right now?
No, they're not flying at all. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Of course, obviously, you know, we've got a fantastic location. We are literally right at halfway on the flight path of between, for example, Hong Kong and London. You know, so we do have a great location. Of course, obviously, we we have built up this very strong Central Asian hub over the last 18 years of operation. So that's been, if you like, a core strength of ours as far as the international route network is concerned and the development thereof. And yes, it's been hammered. I mean, we've lost We've lost all of those China flights. We had Urumqi in Beijing, we had Hong Kong, we've lost that. KL, of course, you mentioned Bangkok. The only thing we've got is this once weekly flight to Seoul, and even that's restricted. We put a 321 LR on that with 160 odd seats, and that's restricted to 100 seats are going eastbound by the Korean authorities. So, really, effectively, we got nothing now east of Kazakhstan.
How is that affecting your fleet plans? I think you've got one of the youngest fleets in the industry, mainly Airbus A320, A321 variants.
Yeah.
You've got some Embraers. I noticed that you had 3 787s on order, but those appear to be deferred. How is it in dealing with, because since I've been covering the industry for, say, the last 5-6 years, I came on right at sort of the tail end of the super growth where people were ordering thousands of planes. The first Singapore Air Show I went to, you were getting $5 billion orders here and $5 billion orders there, and everybody was signing up and ordering planes. And now, it's just not happening. And this has just sort of compounded the problem. What are some of your plans for the fleet? And are you is most of your fleet leased or owned?
Well, just to answer the first bit of that question, Matt, we also have been caught by that. We had we had a bunch of 321 LRs that have been on order. In fact, we placed that order back in 2015, and that was a much delayed program, as you know. So they have come on stream this year. So we've had thus far 3 deliveries, LR deliveries this year. We've got another 4 to come before the end of next year. We also had an outstanding order for some 320 Neos. So 3 of those, one's arrived, 2 will be arriving fairly shortly. So we also had some aircraft that we could have, frankly, we could have done with some more. We could have done with some more delays. But that said, we did move very quickly to retire the 757s, but they've been in our fleet really since the start of the airline in 2002. They were due to leave next year. We retired them early, and they've left the fleet. And also the Embraer 190s, they left the fleet, and we're operating the E2s now. We have 5 E2s. But actually, the LR is a great aircraft for us. It's obviously got the range to do everything on our network, but it's got narrow-bodied economics, and of course, it's got all the economies that that the Neo has been offering to airlines for the last few years. So, the arrival of the LR, of course, the precise timing of the arrival could have been delayed a bit, but actually, it's a great aircraft for us, and it is allowing us to keep. Or once things start to recover and we start to get an international network up and running again properly, it does allow us to put an extremely economic and a very high quality product onto all of those major international routes. And we're already deploying it now to Dubai and Istanbul and Frankfurt and Moscow and so forth. So actually that's a good aircraft to have in the fleet, just not quite now.
Right. And dealing with the lessors and people like that, how's that going?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion. That's the best way of putting it. Like every other airline, we're looking for as much relief as we can possibly get from every major supplier. We have been having and continue to have pretty robust discussions with our major suppliers, be they lessors, banks, OEMs. We've had, generally speaking, very positive engagements with our lessors. Most of them, we deal with a relatively small number of lessors. We've dealt with the same, with the same group for really most of the life of the airline. They know us very well. We've always been a very good paymaster. So, by and large, those discussions have been very positive. But the longer this drags on, the more difficult the situation becomes for all of us, I guess.
Well, and the problem is, and for lessors, banks don't want to be in the aviation business, really. They don't want to own airplanes. They're happy to have you as customers, but what are they going to do with you know, if they repossess airplanes or things like that, if they even could, because you can't travel to go get the asset and everything. And lessors are facing sort of the same situation. I mean, I've talked to a lot of lessors and people in the financial end of things, and they're like, look, we've got to work with the airlines because, you know, the plane doesn't do us any good if it's sitting on the ground too. So everybody's got to kind of work together on that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the key, the key for the lessors is to keep, is to keep these assets basically live and working, and to, to keep some form of revenue stream coming in, and even if that's a deferred revenue stream, I think, from the lessor's point of view, as long as they can see, some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, as regards, each of their customers are concerned. I think that's what we've got to provide them. And everybody's going to have to take a short-term hit, and everybody has to be flexible, particularly in terms of deferrals and the actual timelines of payments. But I think as long as we can all make a commitment to try and keep these assets in some way working, that's the clarity that ultimately the banks are going to need to continue financing. Because, as you say, there's absolutely no point at this time in repossessing aircraft. There's nothing and nowhere for them to go and where to work.
No, and we hope it's a short-term hit. Let me move on a little bit. Air Astana, I was reading about sort of the early days. Let's say they were somewhat colorful and a bit tumultuous. But since you came on board, I think it was 2005, you stabilized everything. The airline has gotten good marks. You've won some awards. I think you got a few Skytrax awards. You've been making money up until the pandemic hit and everything. Any lessons for your peers in the industry about how you've accomplished these things?
I think, every situation is different, and it wouldn't be for me to, really to comment on anybody else's situation, because everybody's situation is so completely, distinctive at the moment, depending on what markets they do or do not have access to. And obviously, everybody's case is very different. But I think we were set up with a very clear mission to operate as a commercial airline, on the basis of providing a level of service, and a level of integrity of operation, and a level of financial independence that is not, and never has been, and never would be reliant upon government support or shareholder support or state guarantees. And that's the mantra that we've lived with since the very beginning. It's the philosophy that my predecessors started the airline with back in 2002. I think they did a very good job in starting up an airline which at that time was pretty unpopular in the country, and a surprise to a lot of people here. And I think they did a great job in getting it going. I inherited it in 2005. We stuck very much to those principles, and we've built a successful operation, a financially independent operation, and that's the way we intend to keep it. We haven't had the need at this point to go back to government or the shareholders and ask for financial support, even during this crisis. We hope to maintain that. That's the way we've always been, and that's where we hope to be as we go forward.
Air Astana, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. You're in the LCC space with and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Fly Air Astana.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
You got it correct.
And I was reading you did an interview in 2019. You said that setting up an LCC was initially a defensive move, and that for that LCC to succeed, that Air Astana would have to maintain sort of a light touch. And it was interesting to me when Cathay the other day, when they mentioned their mass layoffs. I mean, a lot of people are losing their jobs there, which is a sad thing. And they're getting rid of the Cathay Dragon brand. But the chairman and everybody involved at Cathay said they're looking at sort of, they're going to be a two-tier operation. They're going to have a premium long-haul brand with Cathay, and then they're going to have an LCC. Is that sort of what you're aiming for? And how's the LCC doing? You mentioned earlier that the domestic traffic's doing pretty good. But do you see that happening to most of the industry, that you're going to have premium long haul and you're going to have LCC?
I think broadly, yes. I mean, we would say premium long haul and medium haul. And indeed, even on short haul, even on domestic, there is some demand for a premium product as well, even on some of our domestic routes. So it would be, I think, wrong to be completely prescriptive when it comes to dividing up the market. But broadly, Matt, that's correct. The medium and long haul, broadly international routes, are looking for a premium product, which we provide, of course, through Air Astana. The short haul market, the domestic market, and short haul international is looking for a high volume, low cost brand, low cost offering. We provide that with Fly Astana. I mean, it really is a genuine low cost airline. It's not low quality, but it is low cost. It's not a hybrid. It sticks very rigidly to the principles of the low cost model. And therefore, the two brands are very separate, with very different pricing and a very different product offering. And it works well for us. Fly Aristan is growing. I mean, amazingly, really, Fly Aristan at the moment is growing for the last couple of months over the same period last year at 190%. So it sort of slightly bears out what I think a lot of people have said, which is that in recessions and in post-recessionary periods, there is a huge demand for low-cost travel, because you've got obviously a lot of suppressed demand and a lot of degraded spending power. People want to travel, but of course they don't have much money, and therefore you do have this need for and this huge demand for low price travel, which the low cost airlines can provide. And I think if you look back over the last 20 years, we see that the likes of Ryanair and Wizz Air and EasyJet and latterly AirAsia have all prospered in the wake of recessions, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. The demand for the LCC is huge, and it's operating at over 90% load factor since we started operating again in May. So demand is substantial.
Okay, back to the pandemic situation, which a long time ago when it first started, we were talking all about it. Then everybody kind of got sick of talking about it. Now we're talking about it again. It's interesting to me. IATA, ICAO, ACI World, every trade representative that works in the aviation industry. And even Boeing, yesterday or the day before, they did a big webinar on safety on the airplane and how clean it is and how long the virus can stay on an airplane. I mean, and IATA especially has really been hammering the point home that aviation is safe. You're not, the chances of catching the virus on the airplane are basically, they're not nil, but they are 0.0000 whatever. And they keep hammering this message home to the press, to the public and everybody else, but the governments don't really seem to be, they may be paying attention, but it seems like they have other things to deal with, and so they're not lifting the quarantines, they're not lifting the border closures. What's the view from sort of the airlines? I mean, and again, airlines have been pitching in too. I mean, saying, we've got cabin crew that's in protective gear, with gloves and masks and everything else. What's it going to take for governments to open up the borders for international flying to start back up?
Yeah, well, of course, you're right, Matt. I mean, it's quite clear that on the evidence thus far, you know, the incidence of transmission of the virus on an aircraft is low to negligible. I mean, we've had you know, we've had plenty of cases where people have tested positive on arrival, having got off an aircraft, and when we've done the track and tracing exercise with the crews and with fellow passengers, we found basically zero incidents of evidence of transmission on an aircraft. So all that stuff is correct. But of course, the question is not so much is it safe to sit on an aeroplane. The question is it safe for people to travel into my country? You know, that's the question that governments are asking. You know, can we allow people to come into our country? And you know, our position is very clear on this, and it's exactly that of IATA and the AAPA, which is that you know, the international travel has to get going again for a whole raft of reasons, not just the airline industry, but the entire hospitality and leisure industry. And it has to be on the basis of pre-departure testing. And it's clear that you know, if you have a test before departure, you should be allowed to travel, and you should be allowed to enter into a foreign country. Now, in Kazakhstan, we've had some success actually in persuading our government of this fact, and they now do have a very clear requirement, as Dubai has, that you know, if you arrive in the country, you have to be in possession of a test that has been a PCR test that's been conducted recently. And you know, this is a positive development. This is something I think that you know, the world has to adopt as a standard. Now, of course, at the moment we understand that there can be a time lag between you know, the test and travel, and that in theory one can you know, contract the virus between a negative test and getting on an aeroplane. But this time lag is getting shorter and shorter as the testing technology gets better and better and quicker and faster and cheaper. And this is the way to go. We firmly believe that IATA and the AAPA are absolutely right. If we can have a system whereby you know, governments are demanding that airlines only board passengers on international flights that are in possession with a test result, with a negative test result. This is the way to get travel going again. It's starting to catch on, but it has to become a standard in order to get the industry going again.
Let me jump in there because it's very interesting. I have an old colleague. I used to work for the International Herald Tribune when it used to be the International Herald Tribune, and we worked together in Paris. And now he's working for the Commons Project. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but they've come up with something called the Common Pass, which would be used as just for this kind of thing, where governments would recognize, they would sign on to the project. You would get your PCR test before you leave. You'd get a QR code that you could scan. On arrival at the airport, you could show them the QR code. They could scan it. They would know where you got your test and who did the test and all of that. Is that something like you're talking about that the world needs? And are you familiar with the Common Pass?
Yeah, no, indeed. I've been following that debate as well, obviously very carefully. And that's probably, I would say that's the sort of second stage, if you like, of the development of this entire principle. That's the second stage. But it's going to take time, I think, to develop a pass of that nature. And it's going to take time to develop and indeed promulgate the technology that allows for example, QR code checking on arrival. And I think in advance of that, and these are good principles, but I think in advance of that, you know, just in being in possession of a negative test should be sufficient, at least for governments to start the process of reopening the borders. I mean, here in Kazakhstan, I came back, for example, the other day from a trip to Turkey. I had my test done in Istanbul. I arrived here with that test. On arrival, one is met by you know, a number of sanitary department staff who are all there at the arrival gate, checking the test results for people getting off the aircraft, and it works. You know, it's at the moment it's a little bit initial, and it's not, you know, hugely scientific, such as the system that's being proposed would be, but it is working. It is getting people traveling, and you know, the sooner this gets adopted by as many countries as possible, the better.
Quick question. Back in March, you said both carriers had to shut down operations. How hard was that for you on that day?
Well, that was very tough. I mean, obviously, you know, there was a time lag between getting the financial arrangements in place and getting staff put on to what we call downtime here, which is the way of putting staff down, if you like, temporarily suspending work, but still making a payment. It took time to get all of these arrangements in place, and so the cash burn for the first month or so was very painful indeed. You know, but we were able to sort of bind the wounds pretty quickly, and so by May we got that under control. But yes, those first couple of months, really, you know, March and April, they were very painful indeed, very difficult.
Peter, I know you're busy. This is my last question. You've got to go back out and run an airline, and I've got to do other things. IATA has said, and again, we touched on this earlier, that pre-COVID-19 passenger levels won't be back until 2024. I always try to end these videos on a positive note, if we can at this time. Is there anything from your perspective that the industry can look for before that time that's going to be better, whether it's with the vaccine or without a vaccine or anything like that? What's next year going to look like if things continue on? I mean, is there anything positive we can look forward to?
Yes, I'm sure there is, Matt. It comes back to this question of testing that we discussed. Obviously, there is going to be a vaccine at some point in time. You know, so there is going to be a greater understanding of the virus. There is going to be a better testing system of that virus, and there is going to be, at some point, doubtless, a reliable vaccine for it. So things are going to get better. And so, you know, we have to look at that and in mind. And so IATA's predictions may or may not be correct. I think it's very difficult to predict anything at this particular point in time. But what I think we can all see is that there is a huge pent-up demand for air travel. There's no question of that. Every time we put on a flight, you know, people rush to get it. There are huge waiting lists for flights. You know, people want to travel. They want to travel for leisure. They want to travel to see their families, their students, even business travel. So the demand is there. We just have to have the systems in place to enable it to happen. And I've no doubt it will do so. We will start to see a recovery in 2021. When that recovery is complete, I think is anybody's guess, but we will start to see that in 2021.
Peter Foster, President and CEO of Air Astana and Fly Air Astana. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for having me.